Welcome back, my name is Mark, this is Supersonic Sax. If it's your first time here or you've been coming around for some time and you enjoy what you're seeing, please like and subscribe to stay up to date with regularly released content. In today's video, we'll take a brief look at one of the first things you come across in regards to learning the saxophone's upper register, namely the fingerings. I remember thinking about them. These fingerings are kind of complicated, and there's actually a lot of them. But why are there so many Altissimo fingerings? The basic 2.5 octave range is produced with a pretty logical fingering system that is actually quite similar to most other woodwinds. In general, as more tone holes are opened, the instrument's tubing gets effectively shortened, and the notes get progressively higher in pitch. There are a few cross-vented notes like F sharp or C, which also have an alternate side fingering to produce the same pitch without any alternating open or closed tone holes. But aside from this, most notes only have one fingering option. Then when we reach middle D, the pattern repeats itself thanks to our nifty octave mechanism. Due to the instrument's natural harmonic series, the first overtone is an octave, which is especially convenient for us because that makes the fingerings in the first two octaves identical. So we continue up to high C sharp with the octave key, which completes the repeated fingering patterns, and get to the palm keys where we then run out of tubing. So how do we continue going higher? Before, when we got to C sharp in the staff, instead of continuing to shorten the tube, we moved to the lower notes of the first overtones and then climbed up again from there. Similarly, when we reach the limit of the palm keys, this time we're going to move up through the second overtones. And chances are, you're already playing a few second overtone fingerings. Have you ever used the front F key? The second overtone of G is ideally a D, but due to the natural intonation tendencies of the saxophone's harmonics, this pitch is a little high. As it turns out, if you open the top F tone hole with this fingering, it takes the second overtone, which is naturally a sharp D, and moves it closer to a more stable and usable E, which is where our front E fingering comes from. So starting at E, every note is going to have at least two fingerings, and sometimes many more. Now let's look at front F. The second overtone of A is a sharp E. Open the F tone hole again, and this brings the pitch up to the very practical front F fingering. As discussed in the previous video, there is another way to play top F based on G sharp. In this case, the second overtone puts us at about a D sharp, but open the high F sharp tone hole and you have another fingering option for top F. The next note, F sharp, is typically where the Altissimo register is said to begin, although I would consider front E and F to be the bottom part of this range, because they are also second overtones. In keeping with this pattern, we can use the front F key to get F sharp and G as second overtones of A sharp and B. Personally, I'm not a very big fan of these fingerings because you can use the high F sharp key as a vent instead of front F to get these fingerings to lock in with much more stability. But even without this extra key, you still have options to get F sharp and G without using front F. The second overtone of B is an F sharp that is a bit high in pitch, which you can bring down by adding the first two fingers of your right hand, or you can raise in pitch using 1-3-1-3 and side B flat, which is a very common fingering for high G. So just like using the octave key and the first overtones, we can continue up the range using the second overtones, and they can actually take us as high as a D sharp. This is because the second overtones of the palm keys overblow a major sixth higher than the usual pitches with the octave key. In addition, there are other ways to play the top tones based on third, fourth, fifth, and even higher overtones, which brings us to our main question. Why do we have so many fingerings for the saxophone's high register? Because unlike the first 2.5 octaves, where all of the fingerings are based on either a fundamental or first overtone, in the upper register, the same notes can be played using the higher overtones of different fundamental fingerings, which can be further optimized by adding or subtracting tone holes to achieve the desired pitch. What does this mean for us in practice besides having to memorize a lot more fingerings? Most importantly, it gives us the freedom to choose a fingering based on a note's context. Depending on where in a phrase the note is being played and how it is to be played, The fingerings can be tailored to each individual situation. Not to mention, one of the biggest determining factors in this regard is the equipment you're playing on. While it is true that on any saxophone setup, the fingerings will remain mostly the same, and that the high register has more to do with breath control than the instrument's machinery, even just using a reed that vibrates somewhat differently than you're used to may require you to adjust how you finger these notes. So take a look in the description below at the fingering guide for the saxophone's upper register, and you'll notice that some of the notes have nearly 30 fingerings. Play around with these to see which ones work best for you, and also don't be afraid to experiment and create your own. In doing so, you'll discover how to move around the saxophone's high register in any musical context. Until the next video, keep doing the breathing calisthenics, and I'll see you then.